Hello, everyone. This is Angie from TechServe Alliance. Welcome to today's webinar, Cultivating a Candidate Community, Maximize Your Return on Investment. There will be a question and answer session following the presentation, so please write any questions you want answered in the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of the screen. We are also recording today's presentation, which will be available on the TechServe Alliance website and distributed to in follow-up emails. Now, I'd like to introduce you to Kelli Schutrop, VP of Sales at Parqa.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. People are starting to filter in. I would love to hear in the chat below where you're joining from. I am joining you from Minneapolis, and it is beautiful, and we just started the state fair, and I'm very excited. So go ahead and put in the chat your name, your company, and where you're joining us from, and we will have more people trickle in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right. Perfect. So thank you again, Angie and TechServe, for having me. Like Angie mentioned, today we are talking about cultivating a candidate community and how to maximize your return on investment. So just to lay the foundation here, why are we talking about this today? Well, first, let's just do a quick inventory. How many inactive candidates would you say are in your ATS right now? And I'm not going to ask you to put it in the chat. I will have some interactive questions throughout today's webinar, but just think about that. If you had to guess, how many? Is it in the hundreds? Is it in the thousands? Is it in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands? And the reality is, if you were to think about how many of those could be out on contract within the next, within the next month or within the next couple of months, what kind of an impact could that have on your revenue? And so that's what we're starting to discuss today, is how to create that better candidate experience and also increase revenue for your company. So billions of dollars every year are invested in attempting to attract new candidates, but there is really a wildly missed opportunity to nurture and redeploy the ones lying dormant in your database. So in today's webinar, we are going to jump into how to turn those candidates into a community, as well as utilize your current database to drive revenue. So we will also touch on performance marketing and how that can impact the ability to attract, deploy, nurture, and redeploy candidates. So what I've found throughout my background, which I'll share here in a second, is that it really doesn't matter how large the top of your funnel is, how many candidates you're pouring into it, if you're not taking care of them once they are a part of the system. So without further ado, I would actually like to just briefly formally introduce myself. Angie mentioned my name and where I'm from, but I like when I'm watching a webinar, I like to just kind of know someone's background to give me context on the types of things they're thinking about. So like Angie said, my name is Kelli Schutrop. I'm the Vice President of Sales for Parqa. I've spent the past nearly 15 years focused specifically on marketing. So Marcom, PR, branding, digital, the works. But the last over 11 years has been focused specifically on the staffing industry, both managing in-house at staffing firms, as well as working with staffing firm owners and leaders on how to drive their business goals forward through marketing. As you can see, I've got a little guy here. He was born right as the pandemic hit. And so he's now almost 2.5, which is crazy. Love travel. So if you want to connect offline, feel free to shoot me a note. All right. So just one more piece of information before we dive right into that agenda that we're going to talk about today. Just for reference, if you're not familiar with Parqa, we are a performance marketing agency, and we really help to enhance that recruiter efficiency, build candidate communities, help you trust your data, and overall optimize your operations, your technology, and marketing. This usually comes to life through brand strategy, candidate engagement, and client demand generation by ultimately determining what it is you're trying to accomplish, aligning together on how to measure success, and then moving forward into consulting you on what to do next and helping you implement it. All right, so that is the lens that I'm viewing this through based on my background and spending a lot of time in the space. Okay, today we are going to talk about a few different main topics, including why is this important? Why do we want to create candidate communities? How do we engage our data to do that? How do we focus on technology to do it? How do we approach our communication strategy? And then, of course, what matters to your audience specifically? So within each of these sections, we are going to focus on real world examples, as well as tangibly what you can do to take steps in them. So before we get started, this is one of those active participation points. I'd love for you to put a score on a scale of 1 to 10 of where you feel that you'd rate yourself in terms of how to take care of your candidate community. Now, this feels like a buzzword that's been relatively new in the last few months in the industry. I am seeing a note that chat is disabled. So if that's the case, you can go ahead and pop it into the Q&A if you'd like. And Angie, if you can just jump in and help us to disable that chat if it's possible. Otherwise, everybody just go ahead and put it in the Q&A. Yeah, just how you are experiencing that candidate community process so far. And then once we get through today's webinar, I will ask you again, just your comfort level on how to approach it. All right, first, we are going to talk about why is this important? Now, in a recent Bullhorn study or survey, they found that 64% of staffing firms cite that candidate acquisition and experience is their top priority this year. So if we were in a room and I could say, let's see a show of hands on how many people is candidate acquisition and experience your top priority this year, I would imagine we would have hands up absolutely everywhere. And I want to talk about what we're really seeing and how the industry has shifted in the most recent time here. We have this new normal. It's not very great. And we're working to help kind of shift that mindset with this webinar today. The new normal is you dump a ton of dollars and activity into the top of the funnel, right? So just as an example, this is a really great graphic that Sense created actually at TechServe last year and presented it. Let's say you have 1,000 candidates. Let's say 100 of them get offered, 80 of them start, let's say majority of them end, and maybe you have conversations with a few that redeploy at the end. Now, if you think about the amount of dollars that goes into filling that top of the funnel, it's actually $60 billion across the industry every single year. And there is an annual industry turnover loss of $24 billion. So tangibly, what this means is every staffing firm seems to be putting a ton of money into getting more candidates every time there's a search, rather than focusing intensely on what you have as a gold mine in your database. Now, this could be for a variety of reasons that we'll start touching into here shortly. Maybe it's because the data that was input doesn't seem to be accurate or up to date anymore, or it wasn't categorized in the right way, or it's just easier to say, I've got to search for this. Let's go ahead and get new, fresh candidates because now we know that they're interested and it's timely. So I want to pause for a second. I was having a conversation with a chief marketing officer for a $750 million staffing firm recently. And he said, every staffing firm that I've worked for, and the ones he's worked for historically have been even larger than that. He said, everybody said, if we could move that bottom of the funnel, that redeployment rate by even a few percentage points, it would make a massive difference in the amount of revenue we could drive. And again, show of hands, right? Like if you could actually redeploy more of those candidates, whether you are in the healthcare staffing space, the professional staffing space, like industrial, any area, it would move the needle significantly. So that's what a lot of our conversation today will be around, of how to move that needle and create communities that help to activate those people again. So another moment to jump in and share your response. I'm not sure if the chat is working yet, but let's go ahead and do it in Q&A. What area do you specialize in? Is it healthcare? Is it professional? Is it light industrial? Is it a combination? That'll help me hone in some of the examples that I'll share just to be more tangible and relevant. Now, before we move on from this new normal, I want to share something that maybe you've thought about, maybe you haven't. Oftentimes, we find that recruiters join the industry because they've wanted to do it since they were 5, right? No, just kidding. Everybody seems to fall into it. They fall in love with it, it becomes addictive, and they never want to leave again, right? But the reality is, let's just say in a typical day-to-day life of a recruiter, 33% of their time goes to data entry, 33% toward prospecting, 33% toward what we'd consider to be human stuff. Now, as a recruiter, as a leader of a staffing firm, nobody gets into the business to focus on the data and the prospecting. They get into focus on the human stuff. So if we can use technology by making good use of your data, invest in great technology, and invest in great communication strategies to really automate those data and the prospecting pieces, it can help immensely. Not only create a better environment for your recruiters, but also create that better experience for your candidates. So Thank you for everybody who's been commenting on the areas that you guys focus on. That is very helpful. And if you do have questions throughout this webinar, please add them to the Q&A and we will focus on them. And it does look like our chat is working. Thank you so much for everybody's response. Keep them coming. All right, so when we think about why it is important to cultivate a candidate community, there's really three key areas. I mean, there arguably could be many, many more, but the three key areas we're going to focus on today is, for one, the experience has significantly changed for candidates with what they expect from a staffing firm. You know, you think about the process of ordering a pizza. Literally, I don't know if you guys have Papa John's where you are. It's my favorite pizza. I ordered last night, actually did. Pineapple topping, stuffed crust. Gotta say, it's my favorite. I ordered it last night, and I knew from the moment my order went in to when it was at my door, what the process is, what the stage was of my pizza. Now, obviously, a candidate experiencing applying for a job, being recruited for a job, starting there, going on contract, getting redeployed has a lot more gravitas than me ordering a pineapple pizza. But what I'd like to share here is that you and me, we've all come to expect this really tangible form of communication with everything else. We'll call it the Amazon model, right? Like you just know where things are at and you know the next status. So that is something that's different that makes cultivating a candidate experience really important. We'll dive into this here shortly with some tangible examples, just so that you can see what this looks like in motion when it's done well. Now, second, we have experienced a significant labor challenge. And during the pandemic, there were all sorts of buzzwords, right? The Great Resignation, I've heard the Great Reshuffle. But the reality is it's not just due to the pandemic. We also have some widespread changes just across the country. There are more people retiring than ever before. There are not as many people being born into the world as there were before. If you think about your parents' generation, your grandparents' generation, there are just physically less people to work the roles that we have opportunities for. So it's becoming more and more competitive to find those right candidates and to engage them. And then, of course, your competition is shifting. Not only is it shifting because people can work anywhere and be recruited from anywhere, therefore you are, in theory, competing against more companies and more staffing firms for your talent. We're also finding that those candidates, not only with their desire to be met where they're at and have great communication and wanting to be placed on roles, they don't want to take the onus on themselves to constantly update you on where they're at, right? Like, all right, I have changed my address. I have changed my last name. I have changed my email, like these things that happen. So there's an importance of you creating opportunities to have those conversations with them. And the more and more our industry adopts this connected recruiting methodology, which is a term that Bullhorn has created, and just the concept of helping walk candidates through the process and create this candidate community, the more staffing firms adopt it, the better experience everyone has, but also the less unique you get in it. So that's a lot of what we're talking about today is everyone knows I've got people in my ATS. There is technology I can invest in to help automate processes, but how do you do it really well so it's not just noise and it feels like the same as everyone else, but so that it's truly streamlined and customized to your audience. So we are now going to talk about data. Now, data in our industry has always been seen as this kind of thing that you tuck in the corner. Like, yeah, I have an ATS. I've had it for years. I've had it for decades. There's a lot of information in it, and I don't know if I can trust it. So we're going to first talk about that piece of trust and how to grow trust in your data. But then we're also going to talk about how to activate your data in a way that actually informs decisions, business decisions. So first, in order to leverage technology and automation and create a great candidate community, you do have to trust your data. Shout out to Eddie Lee, if anyone knows him. He is over at Bullhorn. He said the number one hesitation we hear from staffing firms looking to implement on automation is that they don't trust their data. Clients don't hesitate because they don't believe in automation. They hesitate because they don't know how to overcome their data issues to make the jump to automation. So I won't ask you to put this in the chat, but if I were to ask you to put on a scale of 1 to 10 how great you feel about the data in your ATS, I would imagine those numbers would not be super strong unless you're a brand new company and you have full control over it. Just the nature of us as an industry saying any candidate can apply and put what you want in our system and it flows right into the ATS, generally speaking, it creates for kind of a hot mess. But then also you have a ton of salespeople, right? Recruiters that are using it sometimes in different ways. And even if it comes down to deduping, right? Like when I mentioned changing a name, changing an email, all of those different pieces, there are tools you can use. Kylo is one. I was just on a webinar with them where we were talking about just the nitty gritty nuts and bolts about how to make sure your data is clean and accurate. But I would encourage you to take that process to say, is our data accurate and what do we need to do to make it accurate? Happy to chat offline if you want to have a conversation about that. It's a really nerdy technical process, but it is so, so important. Now, the second piece is making sure that you can deduce business decisions out of your data. So we call this and refer to this as the measurement strategy and the data model, right? So you've got this situation where you have data in the database and you want to know how to use it right. So let's just lay out a scenario. You've got a business objective. Let's say your business objective is driving gross margin dollars through recruiter efficiency. So tangibly, I want every single one of my recruiters' desks to become more efficient and drive gross margin. One of the things you can do is to determine, all right, what marketing levers can be pulled, right? Marketing goals can we set out that can impact that business objective. So for example, marketing can impact acquisition, reactivation, and retention, right? So how are we getting in new candidates? How are we keeping them active and getting them redeployed? And how do we keep them out on contract when they're there? From there, you can start thinking about the KPIs or the key performance indicators of what you can do tangibly, again, through marketing as an example, to drive forward to each of those specific measurables, right? So maybe new marketing leads in the past 90 days or the lifetime value of the marketing contact. Now, this is something that staffing firms, from my experience at all sizes, have not thought about super in depth. Usually marketing is viewed as we're going to focus on a ton of channels and just see what happens. It's making great movement, but it's really hard to say, yes, it is driving for this core business objective. And circling back to the data point in our webinar today, if you do not have a way to measure success with each of these KPIs, for example, it's really challenging to see how you are able to accomplish those business objectives. So again, with data, it is so important to be able to trust it and also use it in a way that drives change and success for your business. Now, as a tangible example, I saw a few different companies in here in a variety of spaces. Thank you so much, everyone, for commenting. We are, for example, working with a staffing firm. They are a large healthcare staffing firm, and they came to us and had 100,000 inactive candidates in their database. True story, 100,000. Again, one of those show of hands I won't ask you to do. I'm sure you have plenty of inactive candidates in your database. So these are people that unless a recruiter does a specific search and happens to come across them, there has been no activity for at least a year on behalf of that candidate or behalf of a recruiter reaching out to them. So they came to us and we partnered with them on a nurturing strategy that said, okay, we're going to activate this community feel and start talking to them. And when they express interest, we're going to get them in touch with a recruiter and let that process move forward. So in the course of 11 months, that process generated 2,100 placements. And for that particular company, it was valued at $60 million of revenue. So this is not really supposed to be a promotion of what we did. That's not my intent. I want to just show you that there are people in your database right now who literally could be out on contract, that could be making revenue for your company and could be having a better experience. So those are some of the low-hanging fruit pieces that you can start to consider as you're saying, okay, is my data in a good spot? Am I using technology? All right. Next, we are going to dive into technology. Now, if you know Lauren Jones, for example, in the industry, or you listen to anyone that's passionate about technology, you know that there's a lot of places we could go within this webinar, and we only have so much time. So if you have specific questions, feel free to add them into the chat, and I'll see if I can jump into them at the end. But what I really want to share with you is that there is such benefit to using technology and really allowing you to not only communicate regularly with a high volume of candidates, but also to create those scalable processes and create a true candidate community. So a lot of the people who commented in the chat said that they are focused on IT or just that professional side of staffing. So I've got an example for you. There is a company that focuses on healthcare consulting, and they have a team of recruiters. The recruiters are all good at what they do. They have good tenure, well respected in their market. And their top recruiter has 25 consultants in the field at any given time, right? Now, I understand and fully appreciate that that number might not be significant to you if you are operating in a light industrial environment or healthcare staffing. Every business model is truly unique with what the volume benchmarks are. But for that particular business model with the markets that they're focused on, that's really strong. So the experience that they were having was everything was manual, right? There was no technology in place. The communication strategy was happening tangibly from the recruiters to the candidates, whether it was texting or email or voicemail or trying to hop on Zoom calls or trying to hop out to lunch. Like, it's all manual. So again, this is something that has historically been the norm in our industry, and it's starting to become less of the norm because people know that you can automate these processes and create better experiences. So this company said, I just need a way for our recruiters to not feel like they're burning out, because our best recruiters are saying, unless I work on the weekends, unless I cut significantly into the weekdays and spend less time with my family, I can't make more money. Like, I don't have the potential to increase. And yes, I'm already trying to focus on expanding the roles that I'm placing to expand the bill rate and pay rate in that way. But generally speaking, if I want to double consultant headcount out in the field, I'm going to have to double my time. So this is a really good example of when you can say, all right, let's sit down with that top recruiter and have them map out what their ideal process is. Like, truly, what would the ideal process be if you could be everywhere at all times using any channel that's applicable to your candidate audience, following them all the way from when you were intrigued by them, but they're not interested, to when they're actively interviewing with a client, all the way through when they're on deployment, and then when you'd like to redeploy them, or even when they're an alumni. You haven't had the opportunity to redeploy them, but you would love to again when the right role comes along. Having your best recruiter, like sitting down with them and mapping out what that process would be, that is what we did. And then we were able to map into an automation sequence all of those different pieces, activating text and email. And it's truly coming from the recruiter, right? It's coming from her desk, from her email. And if there's a reply, there is a way for her to get directly in touch with that candidate. And this increases the ability for that candidate to feel the personalized experience, because the messaging can be truly through the voice of that recruiter. It just basically makes them into a machine, like a superhero that doesn't have to unplug on the weekends and all of the different things. So to wrap up this particular example, what happened is that particular top recruiter was able to move to truly having 50 consultants in the field and loving that, because she can send 1,500 texts in a week that she would never personally send, but now she's touching so many people, right? There were a couple ancillary benefits to this process as well that I just want you to think about as you're thinking about investing in technology and automation and how to cultivate that candidate community. Two things. One, we were able to elevate the rest of the recruiters to her level. So if you think about your best recruiter, if you could just duplicate them across the board, would you? Of course, right? So now you can take their best practice, what works well for them, and basically tweak it and model it for all of the other recruiters. It helps with onboarding processes for new recruiters, but also it helps you not to have to add additional headcount. That's a whole other piece. Recruiters are harder and harder to come by. And there are just pieces there that can be so helpful to think about. And this can be applied to your IT consulting firms as well, right? Like elevating how you are approaching your communication process with your candidates. And then the other piece is that it creates a really sticky environment for your recruiters. Because if your recruiters are offered to go to another IT staffing firm that doesn't have this kind of a tech stack with this kind of support, they're probably not going to consider it. All right. Next, we're going to talk about communication strategy. And this is when it starts to get really tangible into the, yes, I have data. Yes, it's in my ATS. Yes, I know I need to invest in technology, or I already have. But what do I do from here? So as we're diving into these, if you could comment below, have you already invested in automation? Like, do you have a tool to do this? And in our industry, it's typically Sense or Herefish, which is now Bullhorn Automation. There are, of course, a variety of automation platforms in other industries, but there's only a few that really tie natively to ATSs. So as we think about the communication strategy, Bullhorn had another survey that said 43% of respondents who saw recruiters in a negative light said it was due to poor recruiter communication. So you think about how much you can impact that by really automating some of those processes and allowing people to have more touch points with your recruiters. And speaking of more touch points, there are so many of them, right? Whether you're talking about email or text, human interaction, mobile apps, chatbots, social media, websites, paid advertising. There are so many places that you can get in touch with your audience, and it really matters where they want to communicate. So if we're honing in on that IT staffing environment, right? I know TechServe focuses in on IT and engineering staffing. Like, as we hone in on that, there are different pieces that are more applicable. Like, your candidates are probably pretty passive. They're probably not coming to you in droves. I mean, maybe they are. It kind of ebbs and flows over the years, but you're probably having to go out and find them, which makes it even more important to nurture them and make sure they're having a good experience when you do have a good one in the system. So we want to start talking through not only where to meet them, but also the best ways to start talking to them. And this is what actually will help you stand out from the competition. So if we think about the framework for candidate activity, it's one thing to say, okay, we implemented Sense. Thank you for that comment. We implemented Sense and we've got automations going, right? So we've got our onboarding automation or workflow or journey. We've got our NPS scores or whatever it might be. Everything is meant to hit your candidate at a different stage. So if we walk through these stages, and I know there's a lot of words on this slide, this is actually meant to be a resource slide for you. So if you'd like to take a screenshot, go for it. Otherwise, this webinar, as Angie said, will be available on demand following and sent out to everyone. So let's just walk through those stages briefly. So we have awareness, right? They may know about your staffing firm, they may not. They might not be so happy in their current position. They're open to exploring a new opportunity. Then they move into consideration. So they've had some of their questions answered. They have a next preferred path they'd like to be on. And then we move into placement. Okay, so they're interviewing. You've helped them identify some positions that would be a good fit for them. And they're looking to move forward into accepting that job and then transition. So they're on that role. They're preparing for it. They're getting adjusted. It's been a few weeks and then they're on contract, right? Okay. This process, as you and I know, could be a month. It could be a year. Let's just say for the sake of the argument, it's a 6-month contract. So they are on contract and they're doing their job. And your recruiter, depending on your staffing firm's process, might touch base with them every single month, might be more often, might be like once in the middle of the contract. It really depends on what your best practice is. So there is some touch base probably happening from the recruiter. And then they're preparing to redeploy or just end. Maybe there is not a redeployment opportunity. So as you think about this process, let's take it one step deeper and think about the candidate journey map. Now, this is where it gets kind of nerdy, but bear with me because it's going to make sense once we get through it. So every one of your candidates that becomes a consultant, and even if you're hoping they become a consultant and they're not yet, they go through this process, right? And even on the other side of becoming that alumni. And during this process, they are thinking, feeling, and doing different things. And you can impact their movement to the next stage. So I just want to say that again. You get to impact their movement to the next stage. So if they're aware of you, but they never go on contract, what does that do for revenue? Nothing, right? If they are on contract and they don't get redeployed, does that help to continue increasing your revenue over time? No, it doesn't. So we are talking about candidate communities. We're talking about creating better experiences, but I would venture to say that you are probably all here because you'd like to continue growing your company and you're concerned and focused on your business objectives. So if we were to cut out an example, right, just a slice of this particular candidate journey, let's look at contract active, right? So this phase starts, they're 2 to 4 weeks into their position and it ends when the contract end is coming to a date or, oh, I hope it doesn't happen, but they're not happy with the role. So let's just say that doesn't ever happen, right? So the contract is coming to an end, and hopefully your recruiters are reaching out and having a conversation. But let's just for a second think about what that candidate, or that consultant, I should say, is experiencing. They might be thinking, okay, this went well. I liked this opportunity. Oh, shoot, I don't have anything lined up next. Okay, I need to start thinking about that. They might be feeling pride in the work they've done, intrigued by the work they've gotten to experience, but a little bit of slight panic of like, where does my next paycheck come from when I roll off this contract? I made the decision to be a consultant and it pays well and I like the variety, but like, I don't know where my next paycheck is coming from. And then what are they doing about it? So we've got a best case scenario and a worst case scenario. Best case scenario is what they're doing is replying to your recruiter who's already proactively reached out and started to share with them what their next opportunities could look like, right? We'll call it a worst case scenario. They are starting to check out anywhere and everywhere they can find their next job opportunity, including not with your staffing firm, right? Because I would venture to say, based on experience, and I'd love to hear if there's a different perspective, please share in the comments. Most IT staffing professionals are very good at what they do and are highly in demand and have been for years. So they are not necessarily needing to go out and say, Google search, I'm jumping on Indeed to look. They're probably just reopening that LinkedIn messaging tool and saying, okay, who's reached out to me in the last couple of weeks, because it happens all the time. And they may not have as strong of a loyalty to you as you do to them, right? They just want to know what's the next opportunity that sounds interesting. Sure, it's through the staffing firm or that staffing firm. Great. So by you taking that step back and understanding what they are thinking, feeling, and doing at every stage of the process, you're able to get ahead of that and provide them with relevant information and resources so that they see you as essentially a thought leader and someone that they trust and someone that they're going to come back to. So rather than just having their number one motive be, I need my next role that I like, and it doesn't matter what staffing firm I work with, you want their motive to be, Jane or Joe, they took care of me. Like, they are on it. They know the things that I'm struggling with. They're keeping me alert to cool things happening in the industry. I'm going to go right to them, or they're already coming to me as I'm starting to think about this next phase. Now, if we had more time today, I would walk you through a mini workshop in this. Unfortunately, we don't have time to do all of that today. But as you're starting to think through this, if it feels a tiny bit daunting of like, oh my gosh, I have to like whiteboard out each of these stages, there's actually more layers to it, and it's usually done over a day or multi-day workshop. So don't feel bad if you don't have all the answers to this right now, but this is another one of those good, take a screenshot, jump in with your team or a couple people on your team, or just block off an hour and start mapping these things out, because that's going to help inform the right questions you need to ask as you are creating these talent communities. Now, a layer deeper, why does this matter to your audience? Well, if you think about the folks of you on here who have already implemented automation, or you're thinking about doing it, and the vast majority of the industry at this point has some sort of dabbling in it, you have probably set up some workflows and you're maybe not sure if it's driving ROI. So circling back to one of the purposes of this webinar is to help you see how cultivating those candidate experiences can maximize on your ROI. I'll give you a couple examples. So there's a staffing firm, quite large, that we have worked with. They do professional staffing, including very heavily in the IT consulting space. And we popped into their automation platform and they said, yeah, we've got a lot of workflows set up. I just don't know if it's doing as much as it could. What we saw, there was two different scenarios that we saw. One is that they had NPS score surveys, right? Like, once someone is out on contract, we are talking to them and saying, how did you like it? Or how are you liking it on a scale of 1 to 10? Click here, cool. And they were sending out that message once a month on a cadence. But what they weren't doing is responding the way that a real human would. Now, I'm very passionate about using technology to make human interactions more time effective. Like, you don't, I should phrase it a different way. You don't want to take the humanness out of your technology, right? Like, technology is there to make your good processes and your good experiences for people better, not to detract from it. So let's say, putting yourselves in the IT consultant's shoes again, if every 30 days you get this survey and the second time you get it, you mark a 2, like something is blowing up with the client and it's just not fun right now, and nobody responds in any way, nobody reaches out to you. And let's say at a different point, you're like, man, yeah, actually that got resolved. It's fine. I'm going to mark a 10. If the recruiter were to physically send an email and say, hey, Jacob, how is it going right now? And you're like, man, it's a 2. It's awful. The very first thing that recruiter is going to do is going to be on a phone call with Jacob, trying to navigate and figure it out. They're talking to their account manager to figure out if the client is experiencing something to make it better. Or if Jacob says, yeah, this is a 10. I love this. The very next thing out of your recruiter's mouth is probably going to be, awesome. That is so great. I'm so happy to hear that. Do you know of anyone else who would love to have a similar career opportunity like you have, right? So starting to ask for that referral. So thinking about setting up your automations and just using your technology in a way that is human, and we'll just call it like smart, like not just automated for automation's sake, but actually responding in a way that a human would, that can have such impact. So that's a simple change where you just say, okay, we're still going to send out NPS emails. That's important, but we're going to respond differently. If they rank a certain way on that line, it's automatically going to trigger a note to the recruiter to respond in this way. Or if they respond really favorably, it's automatically going to trigger a personalized note automatically from the recruiter to say, here's our referral program. Are you interested in having a conversation that we can tell you more about it? Or click here to submit someone that you think would be beneficial, in partnership with us. The second example is jumping into their automations and determining that some of the emails that were going out to candidates were really long-winded, quite stuffy, and had no CTA, no call to action at all. And that's just not the way that you would interact humanly, right? Like if you wanted to convey something, whether it was adding value or having an ask for someone, it wouldn't be long-winded and stuffy with like no clear call to action at the end. It would be in your voice. It would be to the point, and it would have narrative, and you'd have a call to action. So even making some of those changes can help create those candidate communities, because it's what matters to them, and truly seeing them as the hero rather than just, okay, we got the automation live, we're good to go. So as an overview with this specific topic of what matters, really just like everyone on the whole planet, candidates are going to respond best to when someone is speaking to their interests, their desires, and their pain points. And it's, unfortunately not that simple. There's art, there's science, there's empathy, and there are a few specific ways to approach this. And I do have a question that just came in of recommending automation tools and, updating the databases when responses come in. Updating the database and responses come in. I'll pause and answer that right now. The two primary automation tools that I'm seeing today in the staffing industry are Bullhorn automation. So if you have Bullhorn, it was formerly Herefish, it was acquired, it's natively integrated, and Sense, which integrates with just about every ATS. So those are common, but just to answer the question of, who does the updates to the database when the responses come in, it can be set up to be fully automated, truly. Like if you are sending out an automation and you're asking for an action for someone to fill out in that email, it just populates automatically. So it doesn't necessarily have to be someone who does it. It's just more of a mechanism that's set up. If you were to think about it, like if you've ever been on a website and you wanted to watch a webinar on demand or download an ebook, when you populate your information, it automatically pushes into that company's CRM or I guess not ATS in that sense, but into their database. So to answer that question, happy to chat offline if there's further questions on that. So when we think about why this is important to cultivating a candidate community and how you can continue thinking about doing that, one is around understanding your unique candidate segments. Now, I know that we are covering a lot of topics here, and we talked about there's the data piece, there's the technology piece, there's the communication strategy, and we looked at how people go through that journey and what they're thinking, feeling, and doing at every stage. But you got to take a step back again and think like this is actually different for every single candidate type, right? So if it is specifically, application developers or a CIO, like no matter what that persona is, they're going to have a slightly different experience. Maybe their journey technically is the same, but they are thinking, feeling, and doing things differently. A lot of times staffing firms think about buyer personas, right? Like what companies are we going after? who are those key people, what's important to them. But then when you think about candidates, you know everything about the role, you know everything about the skill set they need, and you know their nuances. But do you have a place where it's more of like a candidate persona, right? Instead of a client persona mapped out of what's important to them, how do they make their decisions? And those are the different pieces that come into play with understanding and building those candidate communities. Now, I know that's a very open-ended recommendation. My specific recommendation would be to set aside a couple of hours and start mapping out 2 to 3 ideal candidate profiles. And then for each of those, their activity map, right? Or their journey of like, what are they thinking, feeling, and doing at every stage? And again, this is typically like a multi-day workshop. This is not a quick, put it on a napkin, we're good to go forever. But there are definitely ways that you can start doing this like this week to start mapping it out and thinking about it differently. The second area is insight and just understanding their unique journey and what makes what means success for them. And that's not always done just through secondary research, we'll call it. You know, it's important to have conversations with some of your best IT candidates. You know, there may be consultants you have had out on contract and worked with for years. Talk to them about what means the world to them. Talk to your recruiters about what experiences they're providing to their candidates. Oftentimes, your best recruiters are not just good at the volume game. They're also good at the human game, you know, like making people feel cared about. So starting to analyze and digest what is working well can help you back into how can you use technology to cultivate those communities better. And then, of course, recognizing the triggers that tell you when to deliver the right content based on their pain points. That really comes down to that map of like, okay, when are they prepared to take that next step, and how can I support them? How can I influence them to making a decision that helps us partner together if they're the right fit? So we have covered a lot of ground today. I want to wrap up on a thought and start answering any questions you have. What we're finding, and we're working with companies that are oftentimes mid to large staffing firms that have focused to some degree on their data, on their technology, on their communication strategies, but are finding that they need to really hone in deeper to make it more customized, to actually get more ROI out of it. And we're finding that those staffing firms that are leading the pack are investing in that scalable technologies, and communication strategies to really ensure the long-term growth and to drive enterprise value. So having that holistic strategy will get you there faster with less risk, and stronger returns. So if there are any specific questions, I'm happy to dive into them, either here or offline. Now, today, what we covered was a really broad crash course, essentially, on how to build candidate communities. And we could spend an hour diving into each of these. There's so much here that the industry is really honing and refining and getting good at. But today specifically, we talked about why it's important and how you can stand out from the competition, and capitalize on the new normal that we are in. How it's important to trust your data, but also activate it in a way that helps you determine smart business decisions, your technology, and how using it can help you grow ROI and create better experiences. And then, of course, communication strategy. How are you having those conversations with your candidates in a way that utilizes technology, but still feels personalized to what they need? And then, of course, why this matters to your audience and how it helps them, because when they have that personalized feel and touch and know that you get them and you're helping them with the next stage of their career, it makes their lives easier and they're going to keep coming back to work with you. So thank you again. My name is Kelli. I'm with Parqa, and I'm happy to dive into any questions. I'm seeing a few come in right now. As I'm looking through those to see what we can answer live here, what I would love is if you just put a score in the chat of how you feel now. I know nothing tangibly has changed in the last hour on paper, but how you feel in terms of how you might want to approach building a candidate community. So if you were like a 2 before, are you now a 3 or a 4? So give me a score of your comfort level of starting to approach this candidate community conversation. Great. I know that it's a relatively new concept in our industry. I mean, it shouldn't be, but activating technology to do it is certainly the case. I'm hearing someone say we're a small staffing firm. How do you utilize a tool like Sense for us? Sense does a really nice job, as does Bullhorn Automation, of implementing some of those basic workflows to begin, really basic, like what is your birthday? What is your anniversary? We're going to send a message, all the way to, what is our onboarding workflow? What are we doing if someone's on deployment? Usually the templates they're providing will get you to that next level. So right now, if you were at ground floor, they'll get you on the first or second floor. Usually we're seeing a differentiator in the market when you get to like floors 4 and 5, which typically happens by either investing in an internal team or partnering with someone like Parqa, where you're like, okay, we need to dive into these pieces deeper. But to answer your question, I would say start with the out-of-the-box automations they have, and then start asking yourself, if this automation was our best recruiter, what would they do differently within this? And how can we modify that? So I would approach it that way. Great. I'm seeing a 10, and it gave someone more data to bolster their argument. Yes, if you are trying to figure out how to get buy-in on investing in technology, that is something that is a common conversation. Let me know if you want to chat. Are there any other questions that I can help answer? And if not, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining me today. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about this topic. And there's a lot of depth that we could go into, and there's a lot that's evolving in our industry. So hopefully this helped you get a better understanding of what next step you could take and what you're already doing well. Thank you so much for joining me.
A big thank you to Kelli, and thank you all for joining. We ask that you please fill out the survey upon exiting this webinar. Our next scheduled webinar will be How Do High-Profit Technology Staffing Firms Manage Their P&L? Lessons from the TechServe Alliance Operating Practices Report on Thursday, September 8th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, just a reminder that this year's Executive Summit is scheduled for November 7th through 9th at the La Quinta Resort in Palm Springs, California. You can also meet Kelli there, as she will be one of the speakers. If you haven't registered already, then do so soon to take advantage of the advanced rates that end September 9th. Please send any further questions to staff@techservealliance.org. Thank you and have a wonderful day.